everybody. We're here today with Josh, and we're going to get him to talk to us about saving garden seeds. And it's very important, I think, if you have heirloom varieties or any kind of variety that you're wanting to save the seeds from. This is a very, very important skill to learn. So, he's got some beans, tomatoes, and corn that we're going to talk about today. So, here we go.
So tomatoes, both of these tomatoes are Oxhearts. They were going to be eaten tomatoes. They're late in the season, so this one's kind of small. This one's a little misshapen, but that's not uncommon. Now there are people who say that if you're going to save seeds out of something, you should save the first ones. Because if you save the last ones, then every year your seeds will get later and later. But I think if it's the same plant, it's going to be the same seeds. It's just higher up on the plant, personally. What I did is cut this tomato into. You can see this is a really dense tomato. Very few seeds. Seeds are on the outside. And a tomato seed is always covered in a little bit of gel or slime. You just squeeze your tomato from top down in the middle. You get the majority of those seeds will come right out. You just kind of scrape them off in your cup. And you can see they're all floating around in there. It's not a clean job by any means, especially if you have left a tomato in the garden a little bit longer than you thought you should and it gets rotten. As long as it wasn't diseased, you can seed it. And I do that a lot of times. If I have a turtle or something that's bit into it, nobody wants to eat it, then I'll bring it back and seed it. You can see these tomatoes are just basically all meat. They are some.
You need to make sure stuff's right before you
Absolutely.
collect
I'll
it.
talk about that a little bit. I've never been a porch rail tomato ripener, and the reason being is the longer that your tomato is attached to the vine, the plant will put sugar in the tomato, and sugar makes it taste better. If you pull it off and bring it and set it on your porch rail, let it ripen, well, that's as much sugar when you pull it off green or partially green. That's as much sugar as it's ever going to have. So you're still going to get bitter tasting parts to it. Alright, I think that's pretty good. But what I'll do is fill this up with water up to about right here and cover it up with a piece of plastic wrap. And every time I come in the kitchen for the next 2 days, I'll pick it up and give it a little swirl. And all these tomato bits will float to the top and mold. It really makes everybody else out in the house very happy when you do this, because sometimes it stinks. But they'll mold, but your seeds will go to the bottom. So after 2-3 days, you can hold it up and kind of look, and you see your seeds are sitting right on the bottom. And you can pour off the moldy, nasty bits on top and put more water in it, and do that 2 or 3 times, and your seeds will settle down to the bottom pretty fast. Then you can pour off all your water except for your seeds. And I did some that I had. This is what you left over with. It's just clean seeds, none of the gel. And these I actually took out of this cup about an hour ago, and you can see they're drying. And tomorrow what I'll do is take my fingernail and just scrape them up off this plate and break them up. And I put them in bags that are labeled with the name of the tomato and the year. And I keep them in the freezer. These tomato seeds our grandfather saved in 2014, and he died in early 2015. So it was his tomato seeds that grew the plants for these. Now I've been raising them every year since he died, but I almost let the seeds get away from me. My seeds from 2018 were bad. and I was busy. We were moving last year and I didn't save any seeds. But you let those ferment for 2 or 3 days and then you pour them off, and that's the best way to save tomato seeds. Now, anytime you're choosing any kind of plant to save seeds from, you want to make sure that it's dead ripe. So, like a bell pepper that you buy out of the store, it's green, and you open it up and it's got pretty looking seeds on the inside, but that's probably not a mature plant. It would turn red when it's mature. Same thing for hot peppers, Hungarian wax peppers that everybody grows in this area. They've got to change color before those seeds inside that plant are mature. The same thing with this is, a green bean, and this is the same variety of green bean. These are a red striped greasy bean, and this is a pretty much immature. It's coming towards maturity, and this is a very mature pod that is dried out. The seeds out of this one could possibly survive, but the seeds out of this one would definitely survive. We're going to talk a little bit about know what you planted. So this is a red striped greasy bean, and these are very good examples of what you would look for in beans that you want to save. They all about the similar size. They are good and filled out. This bean, though it's immature, if you look at it from the side, it's really only got green beans actually inside of it, the bottom 3. The rest of it are what they call skips. This one's a mature pod, and you can see there's only 3 beans inside of this. And then this one's got 3, and it skipped on the end, and it skipped at the top. I personally would not save beans. These are both disease-free pods. They look good. You get a little mildew on them when they're this mature and have been out in the weather. But I wouldn't save these seeds because of the skips. Now they come off the same vine as these, but you just don't want this genetics when you're saving your seed. Now this pod has got some, I think this is insect damage, but it could possibly be disease. And it's got a lot of skips in it. It's only got 2 beans in the whole thing, 3 maybe. And you just wouldn't want to run the risk of contaminating your gene pool of your seeds with something like this. Eat it. You can always eat this and save things that you know are good for your seeds. I always try to save my seeds early on and good examples of what you planted. Now, if somebody gives you the seed and you didn't buy it out of a seed packet, ask them what you're going to expect. Now, beans are self-fertile. The flowers pollinate themselves before they ever open. And cross-pollination typically isn't a big concern in beans unless you have big bumblebees. Big bumblebees will rip open the flowers to get the pollen before they ever open, and they can cause cross-pollination that way. But you can have spontaneous changes in your seed, and if you do, that's called a sport. When I planted this white bean, and on the inside of this hole, you can see there are white beans it's full of them. This purple looking bean, I noticed very early on that this one hill had purple blossoms. Everything else had the normal white that turned to yellow. So I wouldn't pick this for any sort of seed purpose. And when you hull it out, you can see that this is a tan with brown stripes on the inside. So whether this is a sport or an outcross, I don't really know. A friend of mine, I asked him if he had these seeds, and he did. So it could be that this is a cross from a bumblebee in his garden, or this could be a brand new bean. I don't know. The other thing that I want to talk about is I damaged one of these beans when I opened it right here. So the reason I talked about you don't want to keep a diseased bean is you see this is the shell, and then this little tiny bean here has got a hull on it, and I fuzz that hull up. So if you've got disease in your beans, they actually, it won't be passed on in the genetics, but that disease can live underneath this hull. And then it is there ready and waiting when this bean germinates, and it'll be there for you again next year. You don't want that. Nobody wants that. On the other thing I was going to say on the tomatoes, we ferment the tomato seeds. You can do the same thing for squash and zucchini and cucumbers. You just got to watch. You can't leave them in too long because they will sprout, and then that will ruin the fertility of your seeds.
What you're actually doing with fermenting, it's breaking the seed coat.
Yep.
On them. So anything that's got that gel, or basically it's a seed coat, you can ferment any of those seeds, or really should, I think.
Yeah. Other than that, corn, if you saw the interview with Gracie on Hollybrook, I talked about having this Cherokee flour corn, and it's an 8-row corn, which means that if you count, there's 8 rows of kernels on this cob, there's 8 rows of kernels on this cob, and it's a smooth flour corn. There's no dents or dings in the ends of it. And both of these are pretty good examples of what it should look like. And I went over my field today. Well, actually, the first ear I ever pulled out of this field, it looked like this. Now, I didn't plant one that looked like this, no seed of this color. I don't really know where this come from. It was a gifted seed, so I'm guessing it was a seed of contamination. But obviously, I wouldn't care to grind this into cornmeal or feed it to one of my animals, but I'm not going to save it for seed because I know that this is what it should look like. And then the next stalk over, the neighbor of it, is this. So you can see there's been a lot of cross-pollination. The actual kernels are not the size of these. They're a little more closer to this. You got a lot of color. This random purple is normal in this corn. This is a little bit more than it should be. So you really wouldn't want to save seeds out of this. Definitely not out of this. These two I found on the same stalk, actually, which is pretty impressive. These are 2 big ears of corn. They're beautiful, flawless almost, but if you count it out, there's 10 rows of kernels on both of these cobs. Now I knew that this is an 8-row corn, so if you don't really want to save seeds out of a 10-row cob, if you're saving seeds out of an 8-row corn. The other thing is this one has got a dent. I don't know if it's an old cross that's coming out or what, but this is a perfect hominy corn or cornmeal corn. Another thing I want to talk about is I found this. This is a very end one, and you can see every piece of silk on a corn has got a corresponding kernel on the cob. So when you see the silk hanging off, it corresponds to this. And this corn wasn't well pollinated for whatever reason. But if you tried to save the seeds off of this cob, the fertility is very, very low. And the same way with this one, it didn't get pollinated very good, and the fertility would be very low on it. And you've got a lot of diseased looking kernels, damage, probably water damage, but you still just wouldn't want to risk contaminating your seed with something that looked like this. You know, both of these would be fine animal feed, but I just really wouldn't want to contaminate my heirloom seeds with something like this. Now, if it was a catastrophic crop failure and you planted all of your seeds, I definitely would try to see if these would come up, and that way you could recoup your seeds if it's something that you couldn't get back. And even these, you know, you could selectively shell this out and choose your better ones, and you might could recoup if, you know, predation or storm took out everything. I try to always save back 15 or 20 of my original seeds when I plant. And that way, if there's some force of nature that takes out everything, you don't lose all the seeds that were gifted to you. Other thing about saving seeds with corn is that you really want to save the seeds between my fingers. If you save the ends on the bottom or the ends on the bloom end, your fertility will drop by about 20%. And nobody really likes to replant corn. I sure don't. So if you save the good in the middle, your fertility stays nice and high 90s. Any questions?
Would you talk just a minute about, say, your beans and your corn when you've got it all shelled out and dried? How do you store them?
What I do is I shell them out. After I pick them like this, I will shell these out, and I lay them out on trays and let them dry completely. And when a bean is dried completely for storage, you can pick it up and hold it with 2 fingers and take your thumbnail, and you shouldn't be able to leave a mark on it no matter how many times you pinch it with your thumb, between your thumb and your forefinger. Now, you know, if you really was to bear down on it, you probably could scar it up, but just lightly pinching it, you shouldn't be able to leave a mark, and that means it's dry enough. And I put them in mayonnaise jars, pretzel jars, or whatever. I always label the outside of it and label the top, and I write on a piece of paper and actually slip it down inside with the seeds. Now I write on pieces of tape on the top and the sides, and that way if I use up all those seeds next year and I reuse the container, because I'm a container hoarder, then it's not confused as to what it is. And I always write the year that's on it as well. And that way you use your older seeds first. Now with corn, and I always store my seeds in the freezer. That'll give you years later. Like I said, those tomato seeds from this past year were 6 years old, and I had 100% germination with them. Corn, I'll shell this out, choose my best ones, be very selective when shelling the corn, and I'll fill up a gallon bag or a plastic container after it's really good and dry. The same thing holds true with them. You won't be able to leave an imprint with your thumbnail. And then I'll put it in the freezer. You don't have to put it in the freezer. Corn is cold, dry, dark place, stable for years and years. The only problem is if you can get bugs.
Yep. And
you don't want bugs to destroy your seed corn.
And putting them in the freezer will kill any eggs or anything.
Kill the eggs, and it'll stave off them even getting to it. And that way, if you had 20 years of corn being fertile in a dry dark place, if you put it in the freezer, you've probably got 100 years of it being fertile. It just prolongs everything. That's why the global seed bank is in Greenland in a snowbank. You know, everything's frozen, so it's just suspended in time indefinitely.
All right. We sure appreciate the lesson, and we hope this helps somebody out. And listen, guys, if you got any questions, drop them in the comments, and we'll be sure to try our best to answer them for you. So, see you later.
Thank you.